like to welcome our audience to the inaugural Wide Open podcast. My name is Bruce Huberman. I am a board-certified oral and maxillofacial surgeon and one of the co-hosts of the Two Dot Chronicle podcast and founder. And I'd like to introduce my co-host, Paul Assaiante, the legendary Trinity squash coach with the record number of NCAA titles, which is 17, which is an incredible feat. He's recently retired, and we have a wonderful, wonderful guest to get us started today. Dr. Michael Gervais is a renowned sports psychologist, and he is infamous at this point with his podcast called Finding Mastery. And it's so nice to meet you in person. I've listened to you, Michael, and you really, you say stuff that is, everyone's thinking but can't synthesize it. And so we're really happy to have you today. And I know Paul's been on your podcast, and you guys really had a great chemistry. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and we'll get going. And thank you again, Michael, for being here.
I am thrilled to be here with you, and thank you for the warm introduction and welcome.
Michael, I was on your podcast, and my mind was blown for about a year. And then I re-invited myself onto your podcast, which just shows you what a wimp I am. But the purpose of our podcast, or the goal of our podcast, is I am of the belief that highly successful people have very similar attributes, qualities, work ethic, and that sort of thing. So we're really interested more in the commonalities rather than the differences. And I think when we talk about success, where we have to kick this thing off, Michael, is how do you define success?
I first and foremost, it is great to see you and be with you again. And you can invite yourself onto the Finding Mastery podcast anytime you want, because, I am better for it. And I know our community is as well. And the feedback we get from you on our podcast is extraordinary. So
thank you.
It's great to be with you. Okay. So let's drill down. I'll just give a little bit of context on how I think about success. So I'm coming to this conversation as a licensed psychologist with a specialization in sport. And if there was a subspecialty in consequential environments, I would check that box. But technically, there isn't one. But that's where I've spent most of my time, Coach, is working in environments where the consequences are great. And that means when people make mistakes, that the most unfathomable things can take place. Now, I see sport, traditional stick and ball sport, as a step down from that level of consequence, just to put things in perspective. Most sport is high pressured, fast paced, rugged. Some sport is very rugged and some is very technical. All that being said is that there is pressure and there's a familiarity to what it's like to live in and operate in a consequential environment. But in a traditional stick and ball game, when we lose, we go home to our families. It is not war, right? 250 years ago was very different. 500 years ago, it was very different what would happen. So anyways, I just give some context. So when I think about success, I think about it in much of the way that John Wooden would think about success. And I'll first talk about failure to give it one layer deeper of context for success. Failure for me has nothing to do with the scoreboard. It has nothing to do with the outcome. Failure for me is the unwillingness or the inability to go for it. And so that points to a set of principles and process and skills that allow a person, including mindset, that allow a person to go for it. And that's how I think about failure, is not having the inability or the willingness to step into the messy edge of one's capability. And so and that means for life in general. And it's also drilled right down into, some sort of practice or pregame match or, finals, or they're all the same to me. Success, flipped around, is the eagerness to get right to the edge of your capabilities where uncertainty is raw and it's real, and for your ability to be present in that moment and to be attuned to the unfolding, unpredictable unknown. So what does that mean? That means, for me, success is that willingness and ability to get right to the edge, because that's where you meet yourself. That's where you understand who you really are. Not when you're safe in your living room and it's comfortable and it's easy to have the conversations or to think or to feel, but when and sometimes the living rooms are pretty intense with, emotionally charged environments. Let me not get that, right? Maybe some of the most emotionally charged conversations, right. But it's those moments that we meet ourselves, and having that drive, desire, willingness, want to meet ourselves in those moments. That's how I think about success. And if I can line as many of those up as I can throughout the day, then that day is a quote unquote successful day. And so it has nothing to do with scoreboard. And when I meet myself at the edge, sometimes I'm a mess and sometimes I'm poised, but it's going to that edge, which really for most of us is an emotional edge, not a physical edge necessarily. Right.
Well, that's the wonderful ethereal viewpoint of success. And I embrace that entirely. But we also live in a world with scoreboards, and it's virtually impossible to ignore those. And I've always believed that losing is the playground of success. And so once you have faced being comfortable at being uncomfortable, which is essentially what you're saying, then there's a scoreboard that comes in. And so how does your ability and those around you, those coaches and parents, those around you help you learn from what actually just happened on the scoreboard? Okay,
so all right, I love that question. I want to hit your butt when you said but. We're going to come back to that, right? Because it is, you're right that like when I'm working with a professional franchise and if we have a losing season, the owner's going to fly home in a jet. That's going to happen. Okay. And guys like me, and maybe not you, but guys like me, I got to get my oars back out. I got to get my little dinghy. I got to start rowing. And so success pays bills. Winning matters at some level, 100%. However, I want to live my life and the people that I work with and spend time with, to put them in the positions of the greatest leverage. And the greatest leverage is when you are able to control, maybe even master those things that are in your control. And the downstream impact of that is the scoreboard. So I'm still going to go back to like putting a position of power and okay. So the question that you're asking is like, how do you process failures and mistakes? Is every practice that we have is, every time we do anything, whether that's in business and or in sport, instantly the teams I work with, is we do a hot wash. And that hot wash is sometimes it's a 2-minute, no more than 12 to 15 minute quick debrief. And it's a best practice that I found to be really meaningful. I learned it from special operators in the military. And it's like, we got to take care of our learnings and the mistakes we made, the things that went well, quickly wash them. And then we go take care of ourselves. So first we take care of the mission and the team, best practices and insights. And it's 3 questions that we ask. What went well? What do we need to work on? The second question is not what mistakes did we make? What do we need to work on? So there's a very clear psychological bend about finding the opportunity. What went well? What do we want to work on? And what are the clear takeaways by this hot wash? So that's like, we just put in practice. If you want to be great at something, if you want to be a starter, if you want to be happy, you have to practice the skills to be a starter in life, to be a contributor in those ways. And this is one of those very small skills, is a hot wash after you go for it.
It's interesting. I'm going to give my experience of hot wash, and maybe I've approached the hot wash incorrectly. Very little learning happens when you win. Very little learning happens when there's a successful outcome. They're on to the next one. You could be winning at a tiebreaker in the third, and in your mind, it's a win. I'm on to the next one. But when you lose, I have found no value in speaking to someone quickly after failure. The internal temperature is too high, and they're not able to hear because emotion is the enemy. I find and maybe I'm misunderstanding hot wash, but I find that the conversation, I'll walk up to a student athlete, put my hand on his shoulder and say, tough match, and then come back to it a few hours later to say, this is what happened. I also find if we wait too long, the learning doesn't happen. So where am I misunderstanding hot wash?
First of all, Coach, you understand this process like in a rich way. So that's what I love about you. Like, where have I gone wrong? Like, oh, my, decades of championships have been in air. No chance. Okay. So here's how, when I hear what you just said, I go, yep. And I'll do an add to it on how I think about it is that this is why I love sport. And this is why I love entrepreneurship in that same way. And even big business, like let me stay with sport first, is that there's a physical component that we all observe. And the feeling part of it, the emotion/feeling part of it is the things that we can't easily see. So we can see emotion. So I want to be very technical when I say this, but not lose our community here. The feelings are private, emotions are observable. Okay. And so I'm going to use the word feelings right now to describe the private experience that somebody has from the emotional electricity of trying to figure something out that's hard. Okay. And so when you put the hand on the shoulder of the athlete, you're honoring that the feelings are intense. And I'm mapping that to go, 100%. What I want to do, can I take a little detour and talk about emotional intelligence for a minute? Would that be okay? Okay. So what I want to do is help people be great with their emotions, because I think when you're really trying to do something special, there's a physical component, there's a technical component, there's a mental component. However, it's the combination of those three at the edge that is emotional. And the emotions can win the game or lose the game, if you will. It's usually not the technical, physical skills, because we practice those in calm environments and they're usually pretty proficient. Evidenced by a free throw shooting in practice, we're like 97%. In game time, it's like 82 or something, right? It's not technical or physical. There's something else that's taking place. So what I want to do is help people work well with emotions. And we got to go on a journey for this, because just like any skill building, there's an arc to it. So you putting your hand on them is taking care of them. You're honoring that when the emotions are so high, it short circuits our ability to use our thinking, our reason. 100% accurate. So let's do emotional intelligence for a minute. Is that the first order of business on emotional intelligence is to be able to recognize the emotions that you feel and to be able to name it. Okay. And then once you can name it, oddly enough, according to research, just naming the emotion diffuses it. And so sometimes it takes somebody outside of us to name the emotion. Okay. But if we can do it on ourselves, there's a sense of reliance there that's really important. Okay. So that is a big part of it, if you will, the naming it. So the next thing that we do is that we feel it, we name it, we want to watch it. And I'm not suggesting we do this post-match, but we watch where it goes. And what ends up happening for people is it starts to either move up into their throat or kind of moves into a heat or some sort of, there's motion in emotion, right? So we just watch it and watch where it wants to go. That's just a learning process for us. Then what we try to do, once we can feel it and name it and watch it, again, this is not post-match. That's a high heat moment. I'm talking about doing this in warm temperatures, not high heat. safe environments, not rugged. Okay. Is after we do that, then we try to share what's happening. And that takes time, because what that means is we're practicing using words with emotions. Oh, look at that, coach. Okay. So now if we can practice using words with emotions, that's a skill. That's a real skill that shows up in the boardroom, in the living room, maybe in the bedroom, definitely on the pitch. And then the next thing that we want to do, so we're practicing that in warm environments. The next thing we want to do is practice skill with emotion. So that's kind of the emotional intelligence arc for a performer. And then when we can do those well, we can see that and be of assistance to another person. Now we're a great teammate, because great teammates are not just like, give me the puck, I'll put it in the back of the net. Great teammates are like, I see you. And I'm going to take care of you. And part of my job is to take care of myself so I can be great for you and with you. And that is strictly emotional at the deepest level. Okay. Right. It shows itself technically. All right. Now, I love this. Let's go back to the hand on the shoulder. Intuitively, you're 100% right. I love all of it. And then the next thing that we do is you talked about a window, okay, of time. And I'm nodding my head to that as well. If you and I were able to kind of go back in time, I would watch you do that, and I'd be like, oh, that is brilliant. And then if I was like the elder in the relationship watching you as a young person, I would say, that is brilliant. I wonder if we could do some emotional intelligence work. And that happens in practice. And I wouldn't have known that until, I don't know, being in this environment, for decades as well.
Right.
So there's a glow here that you're capturing in high performance feedback. So feedback is really important. So the feedback to the team, if you have this emotional intelligence thing in practice, is really cool. And it's hard to do post. You have to practice it. Now, I think that when I think of high performance feedback, there's windows of time. And let's go not post game first. Let's go post practice. Best feedback, and there's an art to this, is real time. But sometimes real time feedback kind of jar the whole thing, and it's disruptive to the learning process. So this is where great coaches know the art of real time feedback, to give it or to not. Then immediately, as temperatures cool down, as soon as you can, kind of walking off the court, if you will, there's a window there of feedback, right? And that has to be attuned to the relationship. The coach has to know the athlete has to know the coach, the best way to receive and do that walk, if you will.
Right.
And then there's within the hour, and then there's within 8 hours. Okay, so once you go to the 24-hour, you're getting out of that glow. 36 hours, forget about it. Right. Okay, so you can come back 24 hours later, but you've lost that glow. I think now it's intellectual only, and it's not embodied. So when you're doing it real time, it's embodied. There's emotions, there's physicality, the nervous system is on point, and it's like, it's gold. And the further you get away from it, to your point, the more you miss it. All right. So I nod all of my head to it, and then I add the emotional intelligence piece, and I'll end this phase here with a little story, if you'll allow me here.
No, we're not going to let
stories
give another pearl.
no stories. Yeah. Okay. So I'll take you into, it's 2013, and I'll take you into the Seattle Seahawks. We had just won our first Super Bowl championship, our only, actually. We got to 2 Super Bowls back to back, but we had just won our first Super Bowl together. Only, I should say. And, you know those locker rooms. This locker room in American football, it was, we carry 63 on the roster, plus another, there's like 100 plus alpha competitive humans, some of them very large, lots of testosterone flowing. It's not just a male only environment, but predominantly in American football. And so there's that energy, there's the celebration, the champagne is flowing, the music is rocking. Like people are like, just like, it happened, like this is amazing. There's hugs. And it's a weird thing is that the hugs were not for the other person. The hugs were mostly for the the oneself. It was a weird thing that I felt in that moment. I'm not saying it was terrible. It was awesome. And then Coach Carroll he gets to the middle of the locker room and it's loud and he says, "Get the music down, that music down." And like, we love music. It's vibrant. It's great. Get the music down. So music comes down. He huddles everybody in. It's a tight little pact of, 125 bodies. They're sweating and pulls everyone in and he says, "We now have what everyone wants." And I thought, oh no. At this point, this is like, he and I are at the hip with the work that we're trying to do with culture and developing psychological skills to be our very best, not the best. We're trying to be our very best. And he says, "We now have what everyone wants." And I had this pit in my stomach, Coach. I thought, oh my God, he's going to say we have the trophy, we have the championship, we have the external reward. Like, I was like, no. And it felt like an eternity. And he says, "The knowing of what it takes to be our very best." And I go, oh my God. I was like, oh, yes. Like, it wasn't, and it just like, and the room erupts again.
Yeah.
The room erupts again. And I was like, there we are. We now have the knowing of what it takes to be our very best together.
Right. That's brilliant.
This episode is sponsored by Goodman Speaker Management. Founded over 40 years ago, Diane Goodman has been a mainstay in the professional speaking industry. Goodman Speaker Management takes pride in representing a diverse roster of dynamic thought leaders and speakers, each unique in their expertise, style, and topics. So, if you're hosting a corporate event, corporate retreat, Goodman Speaker Management will create a seamless and impactful experience for all involved. They can be found online at goodmanspeakermanagement.com.
For the listeners, since that's who we're doing this for, I want to share a story as well, because you said something that hit me between the eyes. I'm a neurotic mess. That's how we came up with the title of Run to the Roar for my book. That came from my therapist. And he said to me something that blew my mind, and I didn't think it was possible. We tend to deal with the train crash. Okay, what just happened here? If you go back, there begins to, and I'm talking about an emotional train crash, there begins to be a physical change within our bodies when our thoughts start to get away from us. And then the Doppler effect occurs, and then there's this crash. For me personally, when I started to do an inventory of my body, when I felt emotions starting to rise, I could actually feel heat coming out of my back. And so when I started to go to one of my neurotic moments, I wasn't aware of it, but I said, oh my gosh, there's heat coming out of my back. And I was able to stop the train. And that's a super cool thing. If you all can learn to do that, then the road rage thing isn't going to happen, because you start to see the physical change. And that's kind of what you were talking about.
Yes. When I say high heat moments, right? Part of that is the environment has heat in it. But for me, I have heat. And for most people, that physiological response of increased temperature is a sign that our brain has said, ooh, something is really important here. We better get going. We better turn on. Okay, so that's our ancient brain trying to sort out modern day challenges. The saber-toothed tiger is not, right. The most, and I'll just slide this in here. I just spent the last 2 years researching this topic, and this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but I'm so happy about this, is that we found this concept called FOPO, which is fear of people's opinions. And we believe it's the greatest, or one of, I'll be kind here, but I think it's one of the greatest constrictors of human potential. It's not the saber tooth. It's not the dark alley. Once basic needs are met for people, the greatest constrictor is this relentless, very common fear of people's opinions. It's the thing that holds us back from going for it. We play it safe, we play it small, we conform, we contort, we laugh at jokes that we don't think are very kind. We shape shift to be included and not rejected. And so our brains are trying to figure out how to not be rejected. And right now in modern times, with the advent of social media and everybody's a public figure at some level, is that what we're doing is we're externalizing our sense of self to see if we're okay in the eyes of others. And as soon as we do that, and I think we're all doing it, our ancient brain said you need to be part of the pack to be safe. And right now, that's not a prime directive in modern life, but it is to our brain. So we're outsourcing "are we okay" by looking to others to see if they're giving us a nod, like, yes, you're okay, as opposed to just knowing, this deep knowing. And I think, Coach, you know it. You know that you matter because you're pouring into other people. You matter because you care. You matter because you want to be a global citizen. You matter because fill in the principles that matter to you and you're living them. And so we wrote a book. It's called The First Rule of Mastery. And can I send both you guys an advance copy? It's not printed till November 7th. So I know that, I don't know the timing of when your show will air, but I'm so excited about it.
Hi there, Michael. I was just going to plug your book because you were just talking about, the essence of your book. And it's entitled The First Rule of Mastery, Stop Worrying What People Think of You. And I think that's a huge, huge, point to get across, that, and people can go their whole lives and not get over that little hump. But what I was curious, and it's a little bit of a detour, regarding why is it so easy or easier to see the clarity in someone else rather than in yourself, and the way we comport ourselves with our own children. So it's so easy to go out into the world and see it so clear on what the issues are. Yet when it comes to managing, your own athlete in your family, or you're just rearing your children, it's so much more difficult. So I don't know what the essence of that is, but it really, it's to unravel that. I think you're the perfect person to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. I love that. And there's a parallel here between Coach talking about failure, mistakes, those types of lessons are much easier to work with than success, right? Like there's a better feedback mechanism when something stings than when it's all going well. I think, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, Coach, but I'm going to kind of crosswalk that to what you just said. It's so much easier to see something in another person than ourselves, right? There's a parallel in those ideas. And okay, so for so long, the field of psychology has been the study of dysfunction, disorder, like there's something corrupt or weak inside of a person that's going and doing psychological work. It's so wrong. It is so fundamentally wrong. And the way that I think about psychology is that it's the study of self. And most people, when I go into a room or an organization and I ask, and this is how I kick off most of maybe the first 3 minutes of a keynote or a workshop or something, is how many of you have formally, so I'll set it up this way. I'll say, okay, there's only 3 things we can train as humans. We can train our craft, we can train our body, and we can train our mind. And if my 15-year-old son were here, he'd say, yeah, Dad, you can train your dragon too, but you're not talking about that. Like some smart ass things. So, but I think that those 3 things are really important. And then people are nodding their head, and you guys know this, that as you move up into rare air of quote unquote elite performers, the mental part of the game sings. Like it's apparent because everyone's got the physical, technical skills. And then I had this quick follow on is how many of you have formally trained your mind? And they're like, like most people haven't. And formally training your mind is like the study of self. Psychology to me is the study of yourself. So if you're not trained in studying yourself and you're trained more to study others or critique others, then that's why it's hard to be able to see it in ourselves, because we don't invest in seeing ourselves. We invest in seeing others. And most people don't invest in seeing others. They invest in critiquing, coaching, and those are very different things, but sometimes they're collapsed on each other. Great coaches are not critiquers, as our esteemed coach here would, I'm sure, nod his head. So I think that's why we're not practiced at it. And if you care about something, like if you want to be a starter, in sport, you got to practice every day. If you want to know yourself, you've got to practice that. And it is so much easier as well to see one's blind spots when somebody else can help you see them. So there is the first principle to practice knowing yourself, and that becomes a practice of seeing your blind spots or noticing your reactions. That's one. And the second is when you've got somebody, a mentor, a psychologist, a coach, somebody who has dedicated their time with you to see you, to know you, to help you, and they're working to keep themselves out of the equation, kind of like the hand that leaves the pond without the trace, the Zen koan, that they're there, they're part of the mix, they understand it, but it's not about their needs only being met. That's a shitty coach. That's an amateur coach that does not understand the language of human potential. And so if you can have that relationship, they can help illuminate in the right way. Sometimes it's edgy, but in the right way, a blind spot. So I gave you kind of maybe two ways to think about it. Is you have to study yourself, and it's easier to see stuff in yourself when you do that. And then if you can have relationships of people that know you and are committed to that, then it's so much easier to see those blind spots. And look, when my wife and I go through our challenges, we go see a psychologist, because even though I'm trained in it, like I have blind spots, and so again, it's those two factors. And that's why I think sitting on a pillow, meditating, if you will, that's why I like just getting to know yourself in some form or fashion. I've found that the three best ways to increase awareness and self-discovery as a process is mindfulness, conversations with people of wisdom, and writing. Those to me are the three bedrocks, for self-discovery and awareness.
Well, how lucky for us to be speaking to you, someone of wisdom. It's interesting. Yeah. Dion
to be determined. Right?
Dion is now the rage. And speaking of FOPO, I heard an interview of him recently, and he said, "What is it about me that you think that I care about your opinion?" It was electric. And I'd like to go to something that I've always tried to focus on, because you're the guru on this. But I think that we often make a mistake in trying to get match day, game day, the board meeting day to be more like our preparation. And I think it has to be the other way around, Michael. And please correct me if you disagree. I think once we have a scoreboard, once we have FOPO, once we have investors, the stakes get so high. And I think it's against human nature to think that we can be in that moment like we were in practice. I think in practice and preparation, we need to make it more difficult. I think we need, and what do I mean by difficult? I think we have to be critical of outcome in practice. We have to be critical of outcome in preparation so that the actual contest, the actual board meeting, isn't any worse than what we've been doing all along to prepare. this Tim Galloway, being in the zone, your mind is free of outcome. You may hit that once in your life, but that's a tough place to get to. So I really believe in the Japanese philosophy, which is that you cry in practice and you laugh in competition. Am I crazy?
No. So let's go back to a couple principles, and then I think I like to work from principles rather than tactics, and because the tactics flow from principle for me, is that the principle you're talking about is, and I'll put it in concrete terms. Like let's just imagine the Olympics. And this is a conversation I have with athletes all the time going into the games. It's a 4-year training cycle for most people going to the games. Do you want to see the games as the biggest competition on the planet? Or do you want to see this as just another competition? Okay. So we have to get the framing right. And I am agnostic to which. I don't think one is right or the other. What I'm interested in is for you to fundamentally commit and be consistently, uncommonly aligned to that commitment. So if you're saying competition standards or competition heat, if you will, to keep our metaphors high, I think we need to raise or even exceed in ways that, creative ways, that level of heat in practice. So we're crying in practice, laughing in competition. Okay, so then that's about clarity. And then the alignment needs to be inconsistent, relentless, uncommon, in that way. So because our brain and body wants to find the path of least resistance. We want to conserve our energy. This is primal. We don't want to expend energy on needless activity because we're maybe going to need to wrestle down a saber-tooth or a bear or a warring tribe. So we need to hold our resources to best abilities. This is primal now. So to gear up and raise that level of heat and temperature and stress on a regular basis is what makes athletes special. They have fundamentally committed their life to be their very best. The great ones are helping others do that same thing. And then they fundamentally practice high heat, high stress, high pressure in environments daily. And they do it in a way that is they're facing FOPO because they've got coaches and their peers on tape that are examining how well they did. And so they're working right to the best coaches create that, I think, alignment in the approach, and then help their athlete understand high heat, high stress, high pressure, and how to operate in that. I agree with you. My approach is aligned with your approach, which is high heat in practice so that game day feels like another day. Many people, though, have a hard time actually creating the environment or the internal volition to get up to that fevered pitch. That is very hard to do. So I had a bit of a Aikido twist to it, which is I want to be fully present in my life, and I want to practice that presence because I believe that this is the most important moment that I'll ever have. And I can practice being here with great intensity, with great calmness, with great joy, with great accuracy, with high standards in this moment. So that when the lights turn on at the Super Bowl, I know how to be present with great standards and excellence and joy and intensity, calmness. So I'm going to drill it all the way down to this moment and know what it feels like to have a bullseye for the unfolding moment. And that unfolding moment is, I'll call that my ideal mindset. And so I want to practice an ideal mindset in every moment, independent of heat. And that way, that's how I think the path of mastery of self goes. The path of mastery of craft has some technical skills I got to deliver. And then if I can raise the heat or lower the heat, and I can bring my very best in any of those environments, cheers. And we can do that amongst the team of 63 or 12 or 3 people. We got something now. We really have something special. And then, Coach, I'll add one more thing, is that I get the difference between I want to be the best and I want to be my best. And it is so rare for people to fundamentally commit together to be their best, that when that happens, because it is so special and rare, many of those people end up being the best. And so I think we've got to focus on that specialness of that pursuit, and the outcome does take care of itself. But that sounds so trite when I say it out loud. It's because it is so rare and special that when people do focus and fundamentally commit to be their very best together, noses and toes pointed in the same direction, with that commitment to be our very best together, that because it's special and rare, outcomes do reflect that.
So Michael, I know you went to Loyola Marymount and then off to San Diego State. But what interests me is your mentor, I guess Dr. Ogilvy. So what sort of stuff was he talking about? Not that it was that long ago, but that you apply today. That he's the father of performance psychology, and so what did you learn from him that you apply on a daily basis?
Thank you for bringing him up. He was the reason, Dr. Bruce Ogilvy was the reason that I chose San Diego University for integrative studies was the program. And it was integrative in psychology, sport, and Tibetan psychology. That was the integration. So it was a humanistic approach to high performance. And he was an innovator, and he was different. And he came from a place of deep care for other people. And he embraced the idea that I learned from him, that people understand how to be their very best. Our job is to be in a relationship, to see them, to embrace that, to help them unlock it. So it is not our job to come over top as an expert. And that is it's a bit exhausting and arrogant to even think that way. And so what I learned from him is the spirit of being in a relationship, of what it feels like to be seen from a person who has great reference points, deep care, and wants to see somebody be their very best. And that's a very humanistic approach, and humanistic, is a branch of psychology. And he was an innovator. He was on the edge. He was blazing trails when, I was still in diapers, and I was so, he's no longer with us physically anymore. And I think about him a lot. I think about his wife, Diane. After he passed, she gave me all of his intellectual property. And it's like this gift and burden. I can feel him, even in this conversation, thank you for bringing him up. I feel honored to have people in my life that have taken that role of mentorship and have invested, in me. And I think this is a first principle for me, is that through relationships we become, and nobody does it alone. And so thank you. And he's a trailblazer. He saw me, and it was just phenomenal experiences. So thank you. I hope everybody has that.
It's beautiful to see you feel that deeply. I felt that way about my dad, and so I am moved by your emotion there. One thing that I wanted to mention was talking about being fully present, being fully engaged. That full engagement thing to me is so important, because you don't have to get people excited for the day of the board meeting, but you do have to find a way to motivate them on the Wednesday of practice when nobody's watching. And that's where a good leader can find a way to push the buttons, whatever those buttons are. But one thing I wanted to mention and hear your thoughts on is I think perfection is the enemy of the good. And I think what happens is we wake up on a day a different human being every day. And so perhaps today I have the flu, or my car got towed, or whatever it is, and maybe I'm 70% of my best self. But a great leader and a self-motivated human being needs to understand that the best you can do on that day is to give 100% of that 70. But most people will back off because they don't feel like they're on their game, so it's half effort. not enough engagement.
100%. And I think to add one more piece to it is that if we open up the science of motivation for a minute, is that I think that what we want to do is be able to help people create a culture where people can be their very best, and then they understand how to replicate that process in a new culture, and maybe even co-create a new culture wherever they go next. And so I think part of our job is being that beacon, being that, use your language, self-motivated, high standards, kindness to self. I believe we don't need to be critical to be great, even though that shortcut works in the short term. Mm-hmm. In other words, like, damn it, Mike, that's just not good enough. Come on. Fuck, what is wrong with you? Like, get that shit together. That will, sorry for all that.
I've heard that before.
I think we probably have. But that type of like language in an early age, it helped me get good. But I had to abandon that and let go of that to get to the next, what got you here won't get you there. Like I had to switch that. And that was so ingrained to me. That switch was very hard to do. Mm-hmm. And so self-critique will get you good, but probably won't get you anywhere near potential. Anyways, so I think our job is to create that culture to to help with the motivation to the high standards, and so they can replicate it. Now, if we do the science of motivation for a minute, because you hit on it, there's two things that I'd like to introduce. One is intrinsic and extrinsic, and internal and external. Now, we tend to conflate those words, intrinsic and internal, and extrinsic and external. They're different though. So just for like to nerd out for a minute, there's internal rewards, which are different than intrinsic drive. Okay. So an internal reward is like, I love the way it feels to unlock something. I love the way it feels to be connected, to be straining and strive. Like the reward is internal for me. The intrinsic drive is, I'm going to get up and go. You don't have to set my alarm or knock on my door. I don't need that. Like I am self-driven. So those two are really important to understand, first for self and then for others. Most coaches tend to have intrinsic internal. And then we think that the athletes have to have that too. But some athletes are externally motivated. Why is that? In some environments, if I was bullied my whole life because I had shitty shoes, and if I didn't, and I was embarrassed by like where I lived and you know what? I'm probably going to develop some serious external rewards as a value system. No, why are we critical of that? Because we know that like chasing the external is hard for duration. And once you get the external, there tends to be a demotivation, because just like the dog that chases the rabbit or the rabbit that chases the carrot, we stop and eat it and then we're fulfilled, I don't know why I did a dog eating a rabbit. That's actually probably not the best analogy there. I think they took the rabbit away, right? And dog races, and it's probably a whole humane issue that I'm stepping into, which I'm not an advocate for dog racing. Okay, so I think that this is really important just to understand that those variables are really important, and the sophisticated coach can help play with those a bit and understand what the drivers are for the athlete and help support them to have a bit of both. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have a nice house, and maybe the nicest house that you could ever imagine, or a nice car and a nice watch. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you don't have an internal counterbalance of the love to unlock something, it does become a bit harder. So I'm a fan of high on both, right? And sometimes I need a tap on the shoulder. Like, hey, dude, you hit the snooze button too many times. Let's go. Sometimes I need that. For the most part, I'm intrinsically driven. But so it's just knowing those four levers and like being okay with whatever the person is and saying, oh, so this is a strength of yours. Let's call it external. okay, let's work on the internal too. Let's run some experiments and see if we can do that. All that being said, there's one more on motivation. Okay. Let's use the self-determination theory for just a minute. Is when we can help people have these three variables in place, they will become more internally and intrinsically motivated. Okay. So the athlete, you can use yourself in this case, knowing what you're competent in, knowing that you have a sense of competence in a craft or in life in general. And what I've seen great coaches do, and I try to do myself, is show people and give them evidence of extraordinary competence. Because what's the default? Criticalness. Okay. So for most people. And so we got to show them, wow, you're amazing. Look at this. Look at that. And then give them the autonomy to be the authors of their own life. And then make sure the relationships are intact and they are more sturdy than the fragility of the outcome. So competence in an uncommon way, autonomy, and relationships that are strong, durable, that outlast the fragility, the coming and goings of any outcome.
Michael, so just a little segue here. And I call it, I may not have coined this, but it's sort of the light bulb effect for an athlete. And I was listening to, I forget which episode of your podcast, you were telling this story about a boxer who became a champion, and he finally got the belt, and then he walked away. And to me, that was almost the light bulb effect. And just like with a young athlete, the coach, the parent, till it's processed in the athlete, you're not really getting too far. So you talked about that story, and I just thought that was pretty amazing, to his father's chagrin, that he walked away from that. So I don't know if you have any comments on the light bulb effect.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so what you're talking about is a moment of insight. And from a neurobiological standpoint, we know that the moment of insight is mapped to what's called the gamma brainwave. We have basically 5 brainwaves, and gamma is this aha moment. So we can see those from a brain perspective, electrical output. And we also would embrace from a 2,600-year-old practice of mindfulness and meditation, at least 2,600 years, is that meditation and mindfulness is the practice of increasing awareness so that you can be in the present moment. And then when you stitch together the present moment over time, you go, oh, that's how this works. So you get insight. So awareness to present moment experience to insight. And when you cobble together enough insights, you get to wisdom. So that's how this works. That moment of gamma brain waves and aha moments are signature towards the path of mastery, signature towards the path of wisdom. And so you're right on it. And what he had, it was a UFC fighter. His arm, he won the fight. His arm was up, the belt was around his waist. And he had a 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi moment of like, yes. And then by 3 Mississippi, he said, oh God, I got to keep going. I got to keep doing this. I can't, I've been doing this from my dad's approval forever. And so that type of moment is like, it's a little soul crushing. I'll give you one more that's soul crushing. There was a young athlete I work with. She was a gymnast, and just bright as you can imagine. Future ahead of her is incredible. But she was really wrestling with her sense of self, and she was great. National anthem's being played. She won at the highest level. National anthem is being played. Tears streaming down her face, and the world thinks that she's crying because of joy and happiness and like the celebration of that emotional experience. What ends up happening though, right after, she comes off and she says, "You see those tears?" I said, "Yeah," because I thought it'd be different. I thought that all this work that I was finally going to get to, celebrate this moment, that I was going to be different. I still feel that same misery. And so external does not change the internal. It doesn't do it. And so the first rule of mastery is actually to work from the inside out. And then the byproduct of that is you fundamentally change what I believe is the greatest constrictor of your potential, which is the fear of what others might think, the fear of rejection. And so, yeah, thanks for bringing up those two somber moments in my consciousness. Yeah, but but this is why we love the going for it, because it's not all celebration. The human experience has so many emotions.
One more thought, and then I'd like to wrap this up with another thought. The first thought is interesting. You said that the self-critical voice does work in the short term. And one of the things that I've heard and I speak to our athletes about all the time is that the heart, the brain, and the soul don't know who's talking to it. And so if I come up to you and I say, Michael, I don't like your haircut today, that doesn't feel great to you. But if you say, Michael, I don't like my haircut today, those three organs don't know who's talking to it. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What are your thoughts on that?
First, I've heard of it. I love it. I think it's really good. I think that the criticalness of others is so overwhelming for most people because we've already filled our cup up with self-critical. And, if I was really kind and loving to myself on a consistent basis and you said, hey, your haircut is kind of stupid, I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what's up with Coach.
Yeah.
Right. But if I'm like, man, I don't know about my hair. I don't know what Coach is going to think. And then you say your haircut looks stupid. And I go, oh shit, it's right. Fuck, everything I was saying is right. Like, oh my God. Yeah, you're right, Coach. Shit. Oh, I'm sorry. So I think if we got to fill our own bucket, fill our own cup up.
Yeah.
And, so it's like that external self-criticalness kind of spills us over, if you will. I just mix metaphors in the wrong direction, but it's just too much. And so I like it, the idea that each doesn't know who's talking to each other. I think that's super clever.
So my motivation for this podcast, I can't speak for Bruce, didn't happen. And what didn't happen was simply this. My goal here is to create more people wanting to listen to me. And I think all we've done is to create more opportunity because people are going to want to listen to you, buddy. That was unbelievable.
Oh, you're a gift. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We are forever in your debt. Forgive the sophomoric start with the technology, but we're doing the best we can. And God bless you, man.
You know what? I feel every ounce of that. I want to thank you for how you make me feel.
Thanks.
And, the old saying that people will, oh gosh, how's it go, Coach? People won't care how much you know until they know that you care.
Yeah.
And you make me feel a certain way. And if you make me feel that I matter and I'm important and you give me space. And so there's no debt being paid here. This is just an appreciation for you. And Bruce, thank you for hosting and creating the space for us to do this dance, the three of us. And I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate you guys. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Wide Open Podcast, a Zoa Soundworks production, hosted by Paul Assaiante and Bruce Huberman as themselves. The show is produced and engineered by James Bavelko. Theme song and incidental music created by Zoa Soundworks, LLC, in collaboration with Marco Guarino. Have a question, suggestion, or just want to say hello? Send us an email through our contact page at zoasoundworks.com. That's ZOASOUND WORKS. It may be featured in a future episode. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to the Wide Open Podcast. We upload a new episode every month. Look for us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you find your podcasts.